Childhood and the origin of wounds. I was born in Nevada into a family that seemed ordinary but was filled with invisible voids. When I was 3 years old, my parents divorced. My mother took my sister and me to Denver, Colorado, so she could finish medical school and start her life over. From then on, my childhood was tied to long days waiting for her to come home from school and work and to the quiet nights in our small house. I still remember my mother often saying, "Children should be seen, not heard." At that time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I only knew that I had to be good, quiet, not bother anyone, and never show too much emotion. I gradually learned to hide everything inside: my joy, my sadness, and the small dreams that belonged only to me. The conversations with my father, who stayed in Nevada, didn't make me feel any closer to him. He always asked about my grades, my school, my studies. In his world, success meant a degree, a stable job, and a safe life. When I told him about my piano recitals or school plays, his voice turned distant, almost disappointed. He would often say, "Only one in a million musicians or actors ever succeeds. You need to focus on your studies." Ironically, my father himself had a natural gift for art. He played the guitar, the banjo, and was an excellent photographer. Perhaps, having seen many dreamers fail, he wanted me to choose a safer path. But inside me, music and art flowed like a natural current, the only place where I could breathe and truly be myself. Yet, to keep my father's approval and my mother's expectations, I began to live two lives. One serious, disciplined, and filled with good grades and achievements, and another hidden, where I secretly sang, wrote, and played music. I became a chameleon in my own life, always trying to appear proper, serious, and never different. Gradually, I no longer knew who I really was. I constantly felt lost, afraid of being found out, that I was not good enough, not smart enough, or not serious enough. Every compliment, every certificate, every round of applause didn't make me happier. Instead, they made me more exhausted and further away from myself. That was the beginning of a quiet wound, the wound of a child who tried so hard to do everything right, just to be loved, forgetting that they were already lovable before doing anything at all. Disconnection and the chain of diagnoses. When I entered college, everything seemed to open a new chapter. But in truth, it was merely a continuation of the years I had spent living to please others. I studied pre-med, just as my father expected, but at the same time, I found myself drawn to theater, music, and media as a way to breathe. I joined plays, performed, managed the student television station, and created various art projects. Those were the rare moments when I truly felt alive. Yet, just when I began to express my true self, my father appeared with his first diagnosis. Not a medical one, but a word: dilettante. He called me unserious, someone who only dabbled for fun, without any clear direction. A cold and heavy word, like a nail driven into my heart. I remember the shame and pain I felt hearing that from the man whose approval I had always longed for. I began to believe that something was wrong with me, that loving too many things, having many passions, was a sign of being unfocused. And so, I withdrew again. I put away the piano, left the stage behind, and threw myself entirely into studying, as if the harder I worked, the more enough I would become. But inside me, something was slowly drying up. Joy disappeared, energy drained, and everything became mere obligation. Even as I earned straight A's, received praise, and was seen as a model student, I felt no pride. The joy lasted only seconds before giving way to emptiness and heaviness. When I entered medical school, things grew worse. The packed schedule, the constant pressure, and the lack of time for art suffocated my soul. The emotions I had buried for years began to erupt as waves of sadness, insomnia, exhaustion, and despair. I went to the school clinic and received my second diagnosis: depression. The doctor prescribed antidepressants and recommended therapy. The medication numbed me. I felt nothing, neither sadness nor joy. Therapy helped me put my pain into words, but the most surprising healing came from the third prescription: a suggestion to play piano for 30 minutes a day. I laughed. All I could think was, who has time for something so useless? But as a small experiment, I began to touch the keys again. At first, it was only a few awkward, disconnected notes, but slowly, the sounds reached into the forgotten corners of my soul. I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from the realization that I could still feel. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I simply existed. And in that moment, I began to feel the healing power of music. However, after graduating and entering medical residency, I slipped back into the old cycle. The pressure from the environment, from colleagues, from society, made me believe I had to choose one single path, one identity. When I began studying acupuncture and traditional medicine, people around me were puzzled. They asked, "Are you a doctor, a singer, or an actress?" And that time I received my third diagnosis: attention deficit disorder, ADD. Those labels, unserious, depressed, unfocused, slowly became invisible chains binding me. I lived in a healthy body but with a conflicted soul. I kept working endlessly, collecting degrees, recognition, appearing on television, writing books, yet behind every smile was a deep, empty void. I realized I could no longer feel joy or connect with my own heart. I was a successful, depressed person, still living, smiling, and speaking, but inside, a soul that had lost itself. Music, the key that opened the door to healing. Amid the exhausting days of medical school, I thought I had lost everything: my energy, my joy, and even the meaning of life itself. I lived like a machine: study, eat, sleep, then study again. Each passing day, I felt emptier inside. Yet, in what seemed to be the darkest period of my life, a small thing opened a great door. I still remember that afternoon vividly, when I went to see the doctor at the University Health Center. After listening to me describe my unexplained sadness, exhaustion, and fear of failure, she concluded that I had clinical depression. I wasn't surprised. I had known it deep down for a long time. She prescribed 3 treatments: antidepressants, psychotherapy, and playing the piano for 30 minutes a day. I laughed, partly because the advice sounded strange, and partly because I hadn't touched the piano keys in years. With such a packed schedule, who had time to play? But then I remembered her words, simple yet firm. Sometimes what you need isn't more effort, but permission to feel joy. That night, I sat down in front of the old piano in my dorm. At first, my fingers trembled and missed the notes. The sounds were clumsy, imperfect, uneven. But strangely, after just a few minutes, something long forgotten began to return: life. I began to play every night. Each time my fingers touched the keys, the sadness in my heart slowly began to ease. Music became the only language through which I could truly speak. I didn't need to explain or pretend to be strong. I just needed to play and let my soul breathe. The more I played, the more I realized the pain inside me wasn't my enemy. It was a call home. Every note was a step back to myself. I no longer felt the need to be perfect. I only needed to be real. And that realness, fragile, tender, but honest, was exactly what I had lost all those years. Music taught me how to listen to myself again. When my mind was noisy, I just sat down, closed my eyes, and let my hands find the melody on their own. I realized that my body had its own wisdom. It knew when I was hurting, afraid, or forcing myself too hard. The piano keys became gentle arms around me, whispering, "It's okay. Just be yourself." I truly believe that music saved me during those years. Through it, I not only overcame depression, but also learned to show compassion toward myself, something I had never done before. But the journey didn't stop there. After graduation, I entered the harsh world of medical residency. I worked up to 100 hours a week, trying to prove my worth, and once again, I lost my balance. I tried to fit myself into the serious mold of medicine, forgetting that my soul was still that of an artist. Then one day, when a colleague said they no longer understood who I was, a doctor, a singer, or an actress, I felt shattered. I was once again given a new label: attention deficit disorder, ADD. It seemed that every time I didn't fit the mold, there was always a name waiting for it. But this time, something inside me had changed. Music had taught me that I was not those labels. I was a multidimensional being, both logical and creative, both rational and emotional. I didn't need to choose one version of myself to be accepted. So I began to stand up for who I was. I taught my patients how to listen to their bodies, not just treat their symptoms. I studied meditation, yoga, acupuncture, and integrated them with modern medicine. People called it lack of focus. But to me, it was integration between science and art, between the mind and the soul. Music had opened that door for me, the door to wholeness. It taught me that healing isn't about becoming better, but about returning to the essence of who we are, to the voice within, to the creativity we once denied. From there, my true journey of healing began. The moment of awakening and rebirth. There are moments in life that change everything, not because something grand happens, but because we are finally ready to see. That moment came to me in Hausen Elam, after years of living inside the shell of a successful person. I was a doctor, an author, a speaker. I had appeared on television, stood on stages, smiled brightly under the lights. Yet after it all, each morning I woke up with an unnamed emptiness in my heart. I still didn't love myself, didn't feel joy, and didn't understand why I existed. I called it functional emptiness. I kept working, completing every task, yet inside the fire had gone out. Every night, I looked at my reflection in the mirror, a woman who seemed strong, but whose eyes looked tired and unfamiliar. I often ask myself, have I achieved everything others wanted, but never lived what I truly wanted? Then one day, during a short trip to Europe, my life took a completely different turn. I was invited to perform at a small bar in Saint-Tropez. I hesitated to accept because it had been so long since I last stood on a stage simply to sing, not to impress, not to prove anything, but just to be myself. When the lights shone down, the music began, and I opened my voice to sing. Something miraculous happened. I no longer thought about the audience, no longer feared or judged myself. I simply felt the flow of music, free, authentic, alive. When I looked out into the crowd, I saw people smiling, swaying to the rhythm. I felt completely received, not because I was perfect, but because I was real. That night, back in my hotel room in Cannes, I sat by the window watching the moonlight shimmer on the sea, and I cried. I realized, how long had it been since I last cried from happiness? I no longer wanted to return to the old life, the life of burden, pretense, and exhaustion. I looked up to the sky and said, God, if this is the life I must live forever, please take it away. I don't want to continue anymore. But if there is another path, please show it to me. I collapsed onto the bed, trembling, my pillow wet with tears. And then something inexplicable happened. I felt myself dissolve, merging into the vastness around me. A powerful light surrounded me, so bright I thought I had left my body. In that moment, my whole life flashed before me like a film in reverse. Every choice, every fear, every action linked together, leading me to this very point. I saw clearly that no one had ever truly hurt me. Not my father, not my mother, not those who had judged me. They were all mirrors, reflecting back the lessons I needed in order to grow. And I saw that every soul who comes to Earth has the right to choose who to become, how to live, and what lessons to learn. When I realized this, the fear vanished. I understood that I always had the power to choose again. I could choose love over fear, freedom over conformity, truth over performance. Within that light, I felt surrounded by a pure, unconditional love, free of judgment, free of condition, a love unlike any I had ever felt, even from myself. Then I saw a vision. I was singing, writing, and helping others rediscover themselves, a new life, full of light, creativity, and freedom. I knew it was a calling, the mission of my soul. When I opened my eyes, I knew I had returned to my body. But everything was different. The air felt clearer, my heartbeat calmer, and peace filled my heart. Depression, the dark shadow that had weighed on me for years, was gone. I left Cannes as a new person. Not because I was healed in a medical sense, but because I had awakened. I understood that healing doesn't come from medication or from forcing change. It comes from fully accepting oneself. The last city I visited before returning to America was Barcelona. There, I met a singer named Maudie Chell, who would later become my close musical partner. We stood on stage together, sang, laughed, and promised that when we returned home, we would continue to use music to spread love. That was when I knew my journey of rebirth had truly begun. I was no longer the girl seeking approval. I was the woman seeking truth and singing it out loud, living authentically and spreading love. After that night of awakening in Cannes, everything within me seemed to realign. I no longer saw the world through the eyes of fear and judgment, but through the lens of gratitude. Everything, the wounds, the falls, even the dark years of depression, turned out to be essential pieces that made me who I am today. I returned to the US, but not as the same person. I no longer wanted to race toward the standards or goals that society set. I wanted to live authentically. I started teaching again, but this time not only medicine, I taught how to live fully within one's own body. I told my students, the body is your most loyal friend. If you know how to listen, it will tell you everything about your soul. I remember the first time I stood on the podium after returning. Before, I used to prepare every slide and every statistic carefully. But that day, I simply told my story, raw, fragile, unhidden. When I spoke about my depression, some students cried. One young man came to me after class and said, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one who felt that way." In that moment, I realized sharing my truth is how I help others heal. I began to write, not to publish, but to release. Every sentence was like a tiny stitch sewing up a tear in my heart. I wrote about fear, about the pressure to succeed, about learning to forgive myself. And those writings began to spread. Readers sent me emails telling me they too were on their own healing journeys. I was no longer alone. I realized we are all walking through the darkness in search of light, just on different paths. Music also returned, stronger than ever. Maudie and I started writing songs about rebirth, faith, and the courage to be real. Whenever I sang on stage, I no longer worried about being perfect. I just knew I was touching hearts. Once, after a show, a middle-aged woman came up, hugged me, and whispered, "You sang what I never dared to say." I understood then that healing is not a destination. It's a way of living. Every day, we can choose to heal by being honest with our feelings, by speaking the truth, or simply by no longer running away from ourselves. Someone once asked me, "How do you know when you're truly healed?" I smiled. When you stop trying to become someone else and begin to smile at who you already are, that's when healing has begun. I no longer try to erase my past. I've learned to embrace it as part of my soul. Old wounds have become the fabric that allows me to love deeper, empathize more, and live more fully. Sometimes, I still think of the young woman in her dorm room, crying beside her old guitar, feeling like life was meaningless. I want to tell her, you're not broken, you're being reborn. Now, looking back, I understand. The journey of self-healing is never easy. It forces us to touch the deepest, most fragile parts of ourselves. But it's exactly there, in the darkness, that the seed of light lives. Without pain, there is no awakening. Without loss, there is no gratitude. I've learned to slow down, breathe deeply, and listen. Listen to the body, listen to the heart, and listen to the whispers of the soul. Each morning, when the first sunlight touches my face, I remind myself, today is another chance to love myself a little more. My mission is no longer to heal in the traditional sense. I want to help people remember who they truly are, because sometimes we don't need to find ourselves. We just need to stop forgetting ourselves. I now host courses on listening to the body, where doctors, artists, mothers, fathers sit together, share, cry, and laugh. No one heals anyone else. We simply come home together. I no longer believe in perfection. I believe in authenticity. I no longer seek happiness somewhere out there because I've learned. Happiness doesn't come when life becomes perfect. It comes when we dare to be real, even when life isn't. And that is self-healing, the journey back to our purest essence, where there is no fear, no pretending, only love and presence. If you're reading this and feel lost, please remember, you're not broken. You're being shaped into a deeper version of yourself. The storm didn't come to destroy you. It came to awaken you. When you start listening to that small voice within, when you dare to say enough to what no longer feels true, when you choose the path of authenticity over the path of safety, that's when your healing begins. And maybe one day, you too will stand where I am now, look back, smile, and whisper, all the things that once hurt me were simply leading me home.